playground of Liverpool, Wirral and the northwest, situated on the northern tip of the Wirral Peninsula in Liverpool Bay. Is this how you remember it? Long, hot summers with thousands of people enjoying themselves. So, how did it all begin? Joy Hockey is a local historian with a boundless knowledge of New Brighton, past and present. Joy, am I right in believing that it started out as a watering place for the landed gentry?
Yes, you're quite right. It was started by James Atherton in about 1832. He lived in Everton and he could see this corner of the Wirral from his house where he lived, and he decided he would come over and buy 170 acres of sandhills from William Penkert, who was lord of the manor and owned the area, and he set about laying out the area, and he went to a firm of architects in Dale Street and he had plans drawn up, and the road layout that is shown on these plans is pretty well much the same as we've got today. And he also produced a prospectus, and in the prospectus he said he was going to set out this fashionable watering spa, and he was going to provide a pier, and he was going to provide a church, assembly rooms, a hotel, and he was offering sites for villas. And he also said that the whole of the development was going to cost about £12,000, so he was offering shares of £100 each. And he went on to extol the virtues of the place, that we have fantastic river views, views across the river and views across the Rock Channel where the main shipping was coming in those days. And we had a good beach with clean, hard sand free of mud, gravel and pebbles. And we had pure air, and the whole area was laid out with detached villas. They went all the way up Rowson Street and in the area beyond Victoria Road. And we do have some of the villas existing to this day from the original plan, and these are the ones along the seafront facing onto King's Parade. And we did have one or two, though they've been demolished, up in Montpelier Crescent. We've only got 3 left in Montpelier Crescent, but the idea was that they were going to go all the way up the hill from the promenade right up to Montpelier Crescent itself, but that really never happened. It never got off the ground. And I really think it was because, in one way, James Atherton died in 1838, so he never really lived to see a completion of any of his plans. So the villas were very important to the New Brighton plan. The assembly rooms played an important part, because in a way it was a bit like a community centre, because in the assembly rooms they had reading rooms. You could go and read the latest newspaper. They had a billiard room, they had a ballroom, and it was a meeting place where the gentry could really go and meet each other. It was a very elegant building. It was right next to the Victoria Hotel. Some of the features are still there, but it really is enveloped within the Hotel Victoria. We had steam arrive in the Mersey in 1817, so they had these little sort of steam ferry boats which plied between Liverpool and New Brighton on an hourly basis. It was quite a regular sailing, and so the pier was initially for the people who lived here building the villas. In 1861 the pier was taken over by the New Brighton Pier Company, and they had plans drawn up for a new pier by Eugenius Birch, and his name was the name in piers, the same as Brunel is for bridges. He was for piers. And currently, at the same time, the council also built a pier alongside to get passengers down to the refurbished ferry. So you get 2 piers alongside, the ferry pier and the promenade pier. But the promenade pier was privately owned. It was nothing to do with the council. And this state of affairs stayed like that until 1928, when the local authority bought the pier. So they also did a lot of repairs and a lot of modernisation, and they got rid of a lot of the cast-iron character. It was really a very pretty pier, and I would say it was as pretty as Brighton Pier, but this was New Brighton Pier. By the 1860s, the character of New Brighton started to change, and the reasons for this was, first of all, due to the Bank Holiday Act of 1871. In the case of Liverpool in particular, the living conditions became absolutely horrendous. but at the weekends they just wanted to get away from their awful surroundings. And of course, not working on a Sunday, being the day of rest, they would take the ferry, and the easiest and most exciting place was to come to New Brighton. And this is how you started the day trippers coming. And when this happened, the nobility and the gentry in New Brighton packed their bags and went to North Wales. And they came in their crowds came. And the big thing, when you look at old photographs of New Brighton, is the astounding fact that they were all in their Sunday best. And they were all wore hats. And you got straw hats, you got bonnets, you got flat caps, you got hats with feathers and hats with fruit, and they had come for the day out and they were determined to enjoy themselves. Everything happened on the shore. There were hawkers, minstrels, concertina players, hymn singers, welcome mussel stalls, photographers, rowing boats, roundabouts, paddling and swimming. And we mustn't forget swimming, because with swimming you associate bathing machines. And the local authority introduced bathing bylaws, and from Seacombe round to the bottom of Waterloo Road they divided up the shore for men, women, men, women, men, women, because they were really peeved about anybody prying or peeping, and they introduced fines, and if people got too near where the ladies were in the bathing machine stepping out into the water, they fined them, and likewise if any boats came too near they fined them again.
What's the story of the tower?
Yes, the tower came and went. The tower was, the tower and the grounds, because the grounds are important, was built by a syndicate of businessmen. So they built the big brick building which formed the base for the tower, which was built actually by the same engineers who built Blackpool Tower, Maxwell and Tuke, which is significant really, because when it was pulled down a lot of people said that it was dangerous and unsafe, but you can't imagine a firm who built Blackpool Tower doing a rotten job at New Brighton, because we've still got Blackpool Tower.
So when was it taken down?
It was taken down, the tower, the steel tower was taken down between 1919 and 1921, after the First World War. And don't believe what people tell you when they said it was taken down because it was unsafe. That wasn't true, because it was taken down by the mortgagees of the time to be able to realise assets. And they took it down to be able to sell the steelwork, not for guns and bullets, which they had needed in the First World War, but to build ships, because we'd got a loss of shipping in the war itself. The Tower Grounds complex, you paid sixpence to go in and you could be there all day, and there was a lot going in the grounds. And they had 5 bands or 5 pieces of music, like including an orchestra, for a start. They had a brass band on a plateau where you could go dancing. They had a ladies' Hungarian band, they had a concertina band, and they had a Parisian band, and they also had a band in the Tower Ballroom. And you get people coming like Florrie Ford, Vesta Tilley, Dan Leno, Harry Lauder, and all the other famous names in variety.
So who had the higher tower, Blackpool or New Brighton?
New Brighton had the higher tower. It was higher than Blackpool by nearly 50 feet.
The ballroom continued for many years after that, didn't it?
It did continue for many years after that. And the theatre did as well, though the theatre fell on harder times. And they resorted eventually to things like wrestling.
Now, I've heard about the ham and egg parade. What was that?
Well, when the pier, the first pier was built, there was a little promenade. It was really basically a broad walk, which was faced in stone, and it had little timber steps down onto the shore. And along this broad walk there were little wooden huts, which the gentry, when they went for their afternoon walk, would be able to go and buy a cup of tea, and this was known as Teapot Row. But this was eventually taken down round about 1871, because the influx of people coming into New Brighton was such that they needed more accommodation. So another group of businessmen got together and they decided they would build a block of apartments with some little shops as well. And these shops housed tea rooms, sweet shops, shooting galleries, slot machine, arcades and little things like that. And it was very well frequented, and it had got this narrow broad walk in front of it. It got terribly crowded, and I'm sure a lot of people got pushed over the side onto the shore. It was so well populated, and it acquired a terrible reputation. And the reputation was because of the women and the drains. And when it was high water, the drains backed up and they didn't have any proper traps, and some of the drains went directly into the places where they were selling food, ham and eggs. This is why it got known as the Ham and Egg Parade. And Jerome K. Jerome wrote in a magazine in London that he had gone along the seafront, and in the course of 500 yards he was accosted several times by women into these so-called tea rooms, and it was virtually impossible for young men to be able to go along the seafront without being accosted. Of course, when the Ham and Egg Parade was taken down in 1907, they had to do something about the promenade because it was far too narrow. So they extended the promenade further onto the shore and made it as wide as we've got it today. So the original stone wall is the one they built in 1907. And then they set about the demolition of the building, and they replaced it with the Victoria Gardens and the Floral Pavilion. The Floral Pavilion was opened in 1913 as an open-air complex and was eventually roofed over in 1925. And a lot of famous people came and performed at the Floral Pavilion.
Well, the name Wilkie has been synonymous with New Brighton and entertainment at New Brighton for years and years and years, and the great-nephew of the founder is David Wilkie. David, how did it all start?
My great-uncle was working in a rope factory, and he was working with his brother, and they used to rig up what we call an aerial ropeway. They used to call it an aerial railway at the time. They used to rig up a rope from the top of the building to a big haystack at the bottom of the building, and they used to slide down on leather belts, and that was a form of entertainment for them in the lunch hours. And it became so popular with all the friends and people who visited the factory that they decided to ask the local fairground if they could rig something up when the local fairground came to town for the summer season. So they did this, and it was very, very popular, so popular that the fairground asked them to travel with them. And they travelled with that fairground for approximately 12 years. They came back to New Brighton and decided to settle down here, and they managed to get a piece of or involved with the old palace buildings. Eventually they expanded and took over the old palace buildings, and that was quite successful for them for a very long time until my great-uncle George became quite ill, and that's when my grandfather came on the scene, who was a drummer, and he was selling sheet music on the promenade at the time. And he did very well for himself and ended up taking over the business from the family, and that's how it all started with him.
The new palace came along in 1938. What happened to the old palace?
Well, there was lots of new attractions being invented at the time, and entertainment was very popular. It was a very, very popular Victorian resort, this, and obviously expanded from those days. And what he decided to do was build a more modern building and to put more modern apparatus in it. So he did this. He borrowed money and got shareholders involved, and built a much bigger complex, and finished it in 1938 at the outbreak of the war. The building was complete, but the rides hadn't been purchased and put in yet. So basically the war efforts, the War Office commissioned my grandfather to use the labyrinth of tunnels underneath the building as a munitions factory. And there was 200 women working full-time, 24 hours a day on shifts, creating munitions for the war effort.
Well, after the war, the crowds came back, but then in the late 60s and early 70s, it all began to fall apart. The ferries went, the pier went, the sand had gone. And what happened after that?
Well, since what we call the heyday, unfortunately, the business has just gone from bad to worse over the years up to the early 90s, really. when some drastic changes had to be made. We were mainly summer season, and we couldn't survive with the business that we were getting through the summer season. So one of the things we created about 11 years ago was the adventure playground, which we call Adventureland, and that's open all year round, school holidays and weekends. So that helped a lot. And then 3 years ago I put in the go-kart track, which is for arrive and drive on a daily basis, open every day throughout the year, and we do an awful lot of corporate entertaining, which we incorporate with that, a licensed function suite which holds 200 people. So things like this have brought us business all year round instead of just the summer season. So we're working harder than ever.
So what's New Brighton's future, and where will the Wilkie family fit into it?
Well, I'd like to think that the Wilkie family will always have a piece of involvement in New Brighton, but yes, with this new project that's coming up at the moment, this big sun dome, I hope it comes off. There's a lot of projects that have come and gone, and let's hope that this is the one that's going to bring New Brighton back on the map.
Two miles along the coast, associated with New Brighton but not really part of it, Wallasey Beach, or Harrison Drive as it's sometimes known. You could have a quieter life here, although you could still be surrounded by crowds. Some of these scenes were taken in 1929. At this time, the well-known stretch of beach huts were favoured by the well-off. Up to 1932, there was a bathing station here, where one could hire costumes and towels for sea bathing. Perhaps summers were hotter in those days. It was replaced by Derby Pool, opened by Lord Derby, after whom it was named. At this time, New Brighton was the playground of the north, as hundreds of thousands flocked here every summer to enjoy the many amenities on offer. Some would come only for the day, but there were many who'd stay for the whole of their week's holiday. In 1939, the promenade was extended to its final length as far as the Derby Pool area. There was an extra 2 miles of fairly open promenade with grassy areas and empty roads, which were a boon for anyone learning to drive. These 1939 scenes were taken on very early colour film, which has faded a little. It's an evocative record of life in New Brighton at the beginning of the war. There were plans to develop the new promenade area with hotels and leisure pursuits. Unfortunately, the outbreak of war prevented any further development. How many of the young men here would come back in the summer of 1940, we wonder, or would most of them be away with the forces? Throughout the war, it was entertainment as usual in New Brighton, but many of the visitors were in uniform. Later, the Americans would join the dancing in the Tower Ballroom. By the summer of 1949, peacetime pursuits were getting back to normal. People loved relaxing again at weekends as they joined the crowds. Old war surplus vehicles found a new lease of life and were put to good use by the holidaymakers. Many still wore their best suits and dresses on the beach and carried Macs over their arms. The Tower grounds were the first destination for many. Tommy Mann's steam railway was a familiar feature for many years as it chuffed its way in the Tower grounds alongside the prom. We leave 1949 and move on 10 years to perhaps the peak of New Brighton's heyday. People came by train, many came by coach and a few by car. This was the start of the You've Never Had It So Good society of Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. Large numbers came by ferry from Liverpool. 3 million people a year crossed by ferry in the 1950s. On seeing the Tower building, they knew the 20-minute sail was almost over. Soon, there were the familiar sights of the promenade pier, the fort and the lighthouse. There was a feeling of permanency. It seemed out of the question that it would ever come to an end. Royal Iris was the fleet's flagship that also took holidaymakers on river cruises. Dating from 1951, it soon achieved its friendly nickname of the Fish and Chip boat. It was popular for dance cruises and the riverboat shuffle. It could take as many as 2,296 passengers on ferry duties, but just 1,000 on cruises. She was taken out of service in 1992. On really crowded days, the upper gangway was also used. In 1959, fashion was still largely formal, even on a day out. The hardy, especially the children, would bathe in rock pools by the piers. A trip along the Prom led to the boating lake, which is still in use today. As we passed the floral pavilion, Jackson Earl's Melody in Review was being performed. Next to the new palace, Wilkie's operated a circus. For many, it was pleasant just to stroll along the promenade with the crowds and perhaps watch the passing ships. If you were really lazy, you could relax on a deck chair on the promenade pier. You could also hire one for the beach. For families, the beach was the place to go. How about a donkey ride? Perhaps making sand pies is a cherished memory. At Vale Park you could listen to the band, or twice daily at 3 o'clock and 6:30 you could enjoy Joy Time, the show for children. No signs of stage fright here. Among the sandhills at Harrison Drive, you could get away from it all with everyone else who wanted to do the same. Perhaps a picnic, sunbathing, or just lazing around. You were really someone if you had your own tent. For many, a dip in the Derby pool was a treat. Back in New Brighton, if you had a model boat, the yacht pond was the place to show it off in front of your pals. How about a swim in what was claimed to be the largest open-air pool in the land? You could join about 3,000 others. Sometimes, though, your bathing costume didn't get wet. Among the highlights at the pool was the Wallasey Summer Girl contest. Beauties, as sweet as New Brighton rock, took part without having to get undressed. They paraded in glamorous cotton summer dresses. Where is she now, Wallasey Summer Girl of 1959? Young beauties were not forgotten. On the same day, 4 to 6-year-olds were judged in the New Brighton Starlet contest. Here's how they were in 1959, now 44 to 46 years old in 1999. A more serious occasion was the grand final of the Miss New Brighton Bathing Beauty competition. Their bathing costumes never did get wet, but as sleek as racehorses, they paraded before the Mayor of Wallasey and celebrity judges. The winner, Miss New Brighton of 1959. Remember the Tower grounds? There was a great atmosphere with people from all walks of life enjoying them. The cable cars to the tower roof were added in 1960. The Tower Ballroom was a major attraction throughout the 1950s, with Bill Gregson and his orchestra playing regularly for the dancers. Special celebrations were held, such as the Panto Princess of Liverpool University. Remember those balmy summer evenings when the lights came on as dusk approached and shone like stars in the evening sky? Many a romance blossomed on these summer evenings. Suddenly, in 1969, it all came to an end. The Tower building complex, with its theatre and ballroom, disappeared forever in a spectacular blaze, and with it, many wonderful memories. It would never be the same again. Fire brigades came not only from Wallasey, but from many neighbouring authorities. As the fire died down, the damage was viewed with consternation. Details were broadcast as it happened. For many, it was the end of an era. By 1974, this was the state of things. The ferries had stopped, partly due to the silting up of the river channel. The ferry passenger numbers speak for themselves. Mid-1950s, 3 million passengers. Mid-1960s, 2 million. Early 1970s, only 200,000. The Tivoli Theatre was a sad sight. At one time, the open-air balcony held Reese's Cafe, offering afternoon tea with a view of the piers and ships. There were many reminders of the past. Even the sand disappeared. An attempt by Fortes to keep the promenade pier viable was doomed to failure in 1971 with the closing of the ferry. It finally closed in 1972, and after much protest and a public inquiry in 1977, was demolished in 1978.
Come along, boys. Come and make eyes at the ground at the old bull and bush. Come, have some thought.
Worse was to come in a ferocious storm in 1991. The famous open-air pool was destroyed beyond repair, leaving just memories of times past. In the 1990s, Merseyside Development Corporation spent millions of pounds improving the infrastructure in the promenade area and in Victoria Road. Today, a joint public and private sector organisation, New Wallasey Regeneration, has been established to help revitalise New Brighton and attract investment. Howard Mortimer of Wirral Borough Council.
We recognise in Wirral Borough Council that New Brighton still retains, it still has the potential to be a leisure destination again. And therefore, we have listened to what the private sector is saying about the type of development that they think may be possible. And what they're saying very strongly is clearly it has to be driven by market factors. It has to be commercially viable. And we await with great interest the outcome to their debate on that particular matter. Grant regimes exist within the public sector to encourage this process, the process of investment, in this instance in New Brighton. And for example, European funding through the Objective 1 programme could be targeted for this type of investment, and there are other possibilities as well. In 1999, to encourage people to come and sample New Brighton again, and to see how things were beginning to improve, the New Wallasey initiative instigated a series of events and programmes to attract people here and come and see for themselves. We believe that's been very successful, as this piece of film will show.
This, then, is the story of New Brighton. What will the future bring? Will there be a leisure dome? Will the ferry return? Perhaps in future years we will see a revitalised New Brighton.